Hey everyone, welcome back to City Skylines. My name is James, and in today's episode, it's time for some trains. Our main project for today will be Douglas Union Station, the city's primary passenger train station. The early 20th century was kind of the golden age for passenger rail in the United States, so we definitely want to capitalize on that and get thousands of tourists and new residents coming in by rail instead of by car, just like they did in real life. The station will be multimodal with connections to our streetcar network as well as bus and taxi stands. And here's a sneak peek of what that will look like. We'll also set up some freight train stations, since freight rail is important too, and it will help get our industry leveled up. And finally, we'll be reconfiguring this end of the highway over here to better connect to this industrial zone and also to plan ahead for future development. First, a quick recap. In the last episode, we started building upwards, rezoning much of the blocks in the core here to create medium-density walkable neighborhoods. I think that process is coming along pretty nicely, but we did encounter some heavy rush hour traffic, which let's see if that's starting to pick up now as well in the morning rush hour. Yeah, a little bit, but definitely not as bad as we saw last time, but we will have to deal with that this episode. I did not stream last week, so not a whole lot happened between episodes other than some nitty-gritty intersection stuff. Why can't I even click on this? There we go. Yeah, this is kind of what that looks like. This kind of thing can be tedious, but I'll explain some of the basics of it when we work on the highway interchange later in the episode. Anyway, I've been looking forward to building a train station for quite some time now, so let's get right into it. Okay, before we do that, let's address the elephant in the room. It has been 3 months since my last video. Now, if you're new to the series, maybe you don't care about this, so feel free to skip ahead or just watch this lovely streetcar ride in the background. But for those of you who have been here since February, I want to explain myself a little. So my time is pretty limited, and for me to continue making these videos, I need to fix the process of making these videos. So it took me 3 months to put this out because I was just too overwhelmed with trying to cut down, for this video, over 7 hours of very poorly planned recordings and somehow edit that into a coherent video. And what finally pushed me to try to get something out is that I do want to continue playing this game and sharing what I create with you guys. But that being said, I can't keep spending a week or more of my evenings just on editing for one video. So you'll see a little of my new and hopefully improved process in this video, but you can expect more live footage like this and less voiceover and time-lapse stuff, because that is what takes a lot of time to create. And for my own sanity, I am not going to commit to any kind of release schedule. Alright, so now that we are on the same page, let's build this train station. For our central station here in Douglas, I found a Steam Workshop asset modeled on the real-life Kansas City Union Station. It's a beautiful building, and in real life it was built in 1914, so I think it'll fit perfectly with the time period here in Douglas. Something I learned while doing some research on this station is that the term Union Station means that it was jointly operated and built by more than one railway company. So in DC, those were the Pennsylvania Railroad and the Baltimore and Ohio Railroad. And in the days when these stations were built, railroads were private companies, often quite big private companies, and they operated both freight and passenger service. And right around World War I was when many of these railroads saw peak passenger demand, mainly because cars and air travel weren't yet widespread. And I don't know if people moving to your city in City Skylines can actually arrive by train, but we're going to pretend that they can as we continue to grow the city in the next couple of episodes. Of course, no train station is complete without a yard, and in fact we're going to build 3 different but interconnected yards today. Firstly, we're connecting the platform tracks to the main line to create what I suppose you'd call the station yard. So on the west side, closest to the front of the station, are the 2 mainline tracks, and we'll then build a branch off the main line that serves all the other tracks. Now, as far as the game is concerned, it's kind of random what track is used by the intercity trains, but later on when we have regional rail services, we can use specific tracks for each line. And I'll explain in a bit why I decided to use a through station rather than a terminal station. So now that we've handled the passenger flow into the station platforms, we need to deal with freight traffic, since right now this corridor is shared by freight and passenger trains and we don't want them to interfere. So what we're going to do is create a bypass line, which will be another 2-track main line, and then along that line I'm going to build what's called a classification yard. So this is a freight yard and it's used for separating trains so that individual rail cars can be sorted and then combined into consists going to a particular destination. So you have one big train that comes in and it has a bunch of cars, say some of them are headed to, Chicago, some of them are headed to New York City. So you split off all of those cars and send them to their own tracks where they can be grouped together and then make new trains that go off to each of those destinations. And if you've ever looked at aerial or satellite photos of cities in the US, you've definitely seen this type of yard before because they are gigantic. If you look at like Chicago, for example, there's multiple big classification yards. But we don't have a ton of space here, so I'm going to keep it relatively small. And we're going to assume that traffic is entering the classification yard from the south. And this is important because there's kind of 2 parts to this yard. So in the first part of the yard is where the individual rail cars are decoupled and then sent towards the switches on the classification tracks. And a lot of yards, particularly in the earlier days, would use a hump or an incline here, so that when the car is decoupled, it will just roll due to gravity down into the switches. And we're not really going to do that here because we don't have a ton of elevation to work with. So I'm just going to set up a few tracks here where the train would come in and then individual cars would be decoupled and sent off. And so next the car passes through a bunch of switches that will guide it onto one of these holding tracks where it'll be grouped with other cars bound for the same destination. And later in this episode, we will create a short spur off of these freight tracks that goes into the new industrial area that we built last episode. And finally, the third yard that we're going to add today is a small maintenance yard for passenger locomotives and carriages. Now, this would likely have been owned by one or more of the railroads that uses our Union Station as a place to store and work on their rolling stock. And it'll be laid out kind of similarly to the station yard, but we'll have this train shed that acts as a terminus. So the locomotives or whatever would be rolled into the train shed, worked on, that sort of thing. And I'm routing the train tracks and using one-way tracks here to ensure that the shed can be reached from any of the station tracks, but we don't want trains going to or from the station to go through the maintenance yard. They should just be going straight onto the main line. So that's why I'm setting up the tracks how they are. And one thing to note that is different between city skylines and how railroads actually operate, at least in the US. I think it's different in Europe, but in the US, double track railways, both of the tracks operate in both directions, whereas in the game, the double tracked railroad, each side has an explicit direction. So the left track goes one way and the right track goes the opposite direction. But in real life, both tracks, can be either direction. So trains can pass one another, or when a train goes into a station, it can be on whichever side the platform is on. And the game does actually do that. So you'll see as these trains come into the station, they will sometimes go through these crossovers to go to the other platform, the opposite platform. And that's why all of the train stations in this game have crossovers on both sides of the platforms. So the main reason I chose to use this Kansas City Union Station asset is that I wanted a grand station from around the early 20th century that was also a through station. So a lot of the big stations in the US that you've maybe heard of, such as Grand Central or even DC's Union Station, are entirely or mostly terminal stations, and that means that the tracks go in and come out from just one side of the station. Now that is okay or may be required in certain situations, depending on where your station is located, but given how Douglas is laid out in sort of the north to south, corridor, and how I want our eventual regional rail to work, a through station makes a lot more sense. And so that's why we're setting up all of these tracks as through tracks to give the station as much capacity as possible. Through station, it has a higher capacity than a terminal station because the trains don't have to turn around. So they're going in and then continuing on in the same direction. Another train can come in from behind instead of having to wait for the train to go back out the way it came. That's not really a huge deal in the game. In fact, a lot of the trains in this game treat the station like a terminal station, which is kind of a problem, but we can't really control how the intercity trains operate as far as I know. So speaking of intercity trains, here is the first one that spawned after I turned the station on, and man, it is just zooming straight in. First thing I've noticed is that I need to mess with the speed limit, so I'll do that here in a sec so that the train is going maybe a bit more realistic speed for a steam train. And so we'll zoom in here and look at this. So this is a Pennsylvania Railroad train. It's modeled after a real train, a steam train from the early 20th century. And it has some nice steam effects. That's from the vehicle effects mod on the Steam Workshop. It doesn't work super well with the bridges and stuff. You can see that the steam just kind of phases through. But yeah, that's pretty cool. We've got a couple of different passenger trains that will come into the station. Some of those are those Pennsylvania Railroad. And then there's also one that I found that is based on a train that was in California. And I think we'll see that here in a bit. Yeah, so coming in from the bottom of the frame there is that train. It's actually going in reverse, which is, I don't believe that's something that actual steam trains would do. Yeah, so I'm imagining in our canon that this is some kind of, Pan-American railroad company, and that train is coming all the way across the continental U.S. and arriving here at our station. And that's why it's such a long train, because of course it's carrying a lot of people. Yeah, so there it's slowing down. I put in the speed limits, and so now the trains are going a lot slower as they enter the yard. And I pulled these speed limits from what I could find around actual Union Station in DC. So right now I'm thinking maybe it's a little slow. But this is based on actual train speeds going into the yard. Of course, it's quite slow because they're moving through all of these signals. And you can see this train here is entering the mainline tracks. A lot of the other ones take, I don't know, it's like the 8th or 9th track. So there's like 2 platforms that the trains will actually use, and the rest of them they just ignore. I'm not entirely sure why, but yeah, we just kind of have to deal with that. Alright, now that we've got trains coming and going, we need an efficient way to manage all of the people traveling to and from the station. To do that, we're going to expand our streetcar network with a couple of new routes. And firstly, I'm widening M Street here. So in addition to being a main thoroughfare for industrial traffic, this street will be carrying additional streetcar traffic with the new lines, and I don't want our transit to get slowed down. One upside to increasing M Street's capacity is that we can avoid building a bypass road through our waterfront neighborhood, which, if you'll recall, is something I hinted at last episode. So instead of a bypass road, we'll actually be adding a new streetcar line here through the middle of this linear park, and that line will continue through a tunnel to the other side of the harbor, through that new industrial district, and then go around to form a loop in front of the station. And at this point, our streetcar network is a bit convoluted, so in the next episode I will do a deep dive. I'll explain the network topology, how I set up services and headways, and how we might expand the network in the future to create a true interurban system. And since I wasn't able to fit it into this episode, we'll also build some streetcar depots and car barns. I took inspiration from a few different cities when designing the station access road and the tram line here in front of Union Station, notably Amsterdam, whose central station is also a significant tram interchange. However, it's worth noting that at this point in time in America, most large cities actually did have extensive streetcar networks that did stop at their central stations, including Washington, D.C., and I'll put up a picture here of what that looked like. Interestingly, the modern streetcar has seen a bit of a resurgence in the United States in recent years, and in fact, both Washington, D.C.'s Union Station and Kansas City Union Station are now connected to modern streetcar lines. As you'll see, this access road went through several redesigns until I found a solution that worked, and the MVP mod of today's episode is one called Node Controller, which you'll see me use to adjust the size and shape of the physical intersection node. This mod helps immensely to straighten approaches, widen corners, which I do a lot for the tram intersections, and prevent the texture glitching that tends to happen when you connect roads at sharp angles. I went all out on this intersection, and I'm also using TMPE to set up lane arrows and intersection marking tool to draw lane markings and create a crosshatch texture where the tram tracks go. I don't think these sort of road markings were very common in the 1920s, but we'll just say that the traffic engineers here in Douglas are ahead of the curve. I'm also setting up a custom traffic light here since we only need a two-phase signal. In the first phase, traffic exiting the station, the streetcars, and southbound traffic get a green light. In the second phase, northbound and southbound car traffic get a green light while the streetcars wait. Enjoy the time-lapse as we build out and connect the rest of the streetcar network. I'll be back afterwards when we finally put in a freight rail station. Our freight rail connection will serve the new industrial zone we built last episode. Unfortunately, placing the station does demolish part of the old factory building, which I can't seem to figure out how to replace, but truth be told, we needed the space for a more functioning industrial zone anyway. Access to convenient transportation for freight and goods is super important both in-game and in real cities. Before trains came along, waterways played that role, and we can imagine that the city of Douglas first sprang up in this location because of the navigable river and the harbor here. Now, we want as much freight as possible to come by rail. In city skylines, freight rail stations help your industrial zones level up, which is important because those higher level zones employ more educated workers and generate more tax revenue. So once the landfill here is done emptying, I'll bulldoze it and be able to fit more industrial zone close to the station. The last thing we'll do in today's episode is rework this highway connection into the city from the north. We'll be removing the existing transition at Old Main Street and replacing the highway up to here with a new route heading west, which will then merge into the real road running along the railway tracks. And I honestly should have done this in the map editor, so you'll just have to bear with me and pretend it was like this all along. I do generally like to keep the game unpaused while working on infrastructure for realism reasons or whatever, but what we're building here, and really a lot of what we build in Phase 1, is essentially supposed to be what was in the city already, so you'll see me pausing from time to time. As we progress in the series, I'll try to avoid pausing the game while building as much as I can, and I'll force myself to create detours and alternate routes if we're altering roads or metro lines or whatever. So the new intersection where the two-lane highway transitions to a national road is definitely shaping up to be kind of a problem, and it's not helped by the streetcar loop here on New York Avenue. Right now this intersection is bogged down by traffic trying to turn left off of New York Avenue to go west, so I think in the future we'll need to work out a better solution here, probably by continuing the highway in the space between the existing road and the railway track and then building a proper interchange. Throughout this episode, you've been seeing various bridges and tunnels sort of pop up in the background without much explanation, particularly along the rail corridor here. So I rebuilt these bridges off camera, and I made them intentionally overbuilt. So I don't think we really need, 6 lanes here and 6 lanes here right now, but I want to anticipate growth and even be able to repurpose some of these lanes in the future once these industrial zones are maybe turned into something else. So I also made this bridge here on New York Avenue. I made this streetcar only because it's carrying more streetcar lines now, and the truck traffic gets rerouted to this bridge or this one down here, which does also carry streetcars. And in fact, I think we managed to mostly get the truck traffic out of this part of the city, and we're instead, it's flowing down here. And actually, a lot of the freight is now coming by rail. This freight station is pretty congested, and this is a terminal station, and it's a problem because these trains are too long for the station, so they don't go in all the way, and this crossover gets occupied, and then they do that little maneuver to try to reverse out, and yeah, it's kind of an issue. I maybe could solve it by moving this further down, but then the trains that spawn here won't fit. So yeah, there's kind of not really enough room to do much of anything because of where the crossovers are. There's going to be a problem either way because they're never going to pull far enough forward. Yeah, it's really just a problem with the asset itself and the fact that I'm using longer trains. But hopefully this doesn't get congested because all of our coal arrives by train, and it happened earlier where the trains were stuck and I had to delete them, and these power plants ran out of coal, and as a result there was a massive wave of abandonment over on this side of the city because people were out of power. But yeah, hopefully that doesn't happen again. Keep an eye on it if it does. But anyway, back to the truck traffic. At the south end here, I built this road, bypass road, which goes straight here into M Street. And I also removed the railroad level crossing here, which was causing a lot of issues. And then at the north end, we have this new tunnel that I built off camera. It's not technically a tunnel, it's really just the railroad is elevated and then the ground underneath is depressed. I think this looks a little more realistic, and I like using tunnels where I can because the vehicles need less clearance in real life than the trains do above them. So you can have shorter approaches to the tunnel and have it still look realistic. And then in terms of traffic flow into the city itself, we've got these interchanges now funneling traffic. This intersection here, this sort of three-way, has been a bottleneck for a long time. It's still kind of a bottleneck, but what I did is I set up 3 time traffic lights that are all synchronized here. So I think I still need to do some tweaking here with the lengths. In the morning, it's a bit worse because I did it in the evening, so I was looking at the evening rush hour. But it does help traffic flow from New York Avenue because people will be able to turn here and then go straight through all in the same cycle. And in order to do that with the TMPE time traffic lights, what you have to do is set the minimum and maximum duration to the same value. So the light always runs at a set cycle. It doesn't adapt based on traffic flows. So it's a dumb light, but that's the only way to get them synchronized with each other so they all flip at the same time. But anyway, down here, I had a road originally, you may remember. I had a road going from here to here, and that road was causing a lot of issues because I don't really want traffic to be funneling in that way. We want traffic to be coming in this way. So for example, like coming off the highway here, going down this way. I think we still need to do some work there because I don't know if cars are actually doing that because I think this route is longer. So we'll have to try to mess with that. I want, vehicles to be coming in this way and going into the station road that way. But fortunately, the station itself is not causing a lot of car traffic because most of the passengers are getting picked up by the streetcar. So they're either going to one of these 2 stops on those lines, or they're walking down here and going on this stop. And that gives them access to pretty much all of the streetcar lines except for the one going over here. So I'm pretty happy with how that's working out. And as you can see, reconfiguring this highway and moving it over here gives us a lot more space to work with here. It allows us to complete some of these diagonal roads, which I think looks nice. And yeah, it's just a better way to do it. I should have had it organized this way from the start, but whatever. We're here now, and yeah, I think that's about it. I just wanted to touch on some of the changes I made over here that I hadn't explained. This freight station is a nightmare. I'll have to do something with that. I don't know. I don't think this is going to work long term. Maybe if I made a loop going around so that they could continue out that way, I think that might help. I'll probably have to do a tunnel over here, but Anyway, yeah, so there's the rail yard. There's the Douglas Union Station. It's carrying quite a lot of people. It definitely gets a lot of train traffic, which is great. And the city is growing. There's a lot of industrial demand right now because I upzoned everywhere. But next episode, we will start filling in more of this grid. I want to build streets out over here. I want to build all the streets in here. We have money to do that, so I think we might as well do it, get ourselves planned out, and then work on our education as well, build a couple new high schools, and then do the deep dive into the tram network like I was talking about. So yeah, I think that'll about do it for this episode. Thank you all for tuning in. Sorry about the hiatus. You know, it wouldn't be a series on this channel if there wasn't a long unnecessary hiatus. So yeah, hopefully it won't happen again, but you know, can't guarantee that. So anyway, yeah, I will see you all in the next episode.